Everybody's talking about 4K. It's almost like HD doesn't even exist anymore. Well, the truth is HD is alive and well, but 4K is actually the big thing that's coming up. And a lot of people out there are buying 4K cameras, but they're not actually shooting 4K. If they are, they're busy editing it in the 1920 1080 timeline, which is what I've been doing. So far, not a single client of mine has ever asked for 4K. I don't even think if I gave them 4K, they'd know what to do with it. However, 4K is very important in our workflow. Just this week, I've been shooting with this camera. This is the JVC GY-HM200. And you can see that's a nice little camera. And what astounds me about this is the pictures I'm getting actually compare with a lot of the high-end pictures that I've seen on a lot of the big cameras. Now, there's a lot to understanding what 4K is about. It's not just shooting 4K, it's shooting 4K for a reason. And the reason that I've been shooting 4K lately is because 4K makes really good HD. Now, this was a situation we encountered many years ago when it went from standard definition to HD. We were shooting HD and making beautiful looking SD. Now, I'm not suggesting that shooting 4K for the sake of 4K is not a good idea. There just happens to be a situation at the moment where virtually nobody has a 4K television. They're in the stores, but all the work, all the clients, everyone is still entrenched in an HD world. So where does that leave us? Well, I'll tell you, if you're buying a camera now, more likely than not, you're going to buy a 4K camera because you want to future-proof yourself. Some people say you should shoot 4K, have your 4K rushes, that way you can always go back to 4K. Maybe that's a good argument, I don't know, it doesn't matter to me so much. I feel that good HD is good 4K is good. But the ability to zoom in on the images is a big deal. It's like having an optical printer from the film days built inside your camera. You can reframe within the timeline, you can do all sorts of things. So long as you shoot 4K, you've got that resolution to punch in. And in my experience, you can go up to about 185% on 4K and hold that resolution. So that's a lot of zoom in on an HD timeline on the 4K frame that we can do. Now, let's talk about this camera, the GY-HM200 by JVC. And the wonderful thing is, it's actually not very big. It's incredibly light and it's incredibly powerful. Now, obviously, I'm going to show you a whole lot of pictures that I've been shooting with this camera, and I'm really seriously impressed. And I'm impressed for a few reasons. With the experience I've had with 4K so far, not talking about this camera, but some of the other systems out there, 4K can actually be quite difficult. You shoot massive amounts of data. Some of the data rates can be up to 600 megabits a second, depending which camera you're using. Some of the cameras will do RAW. RAW is fantastic. I'm sure most of you know about RAW. I happen to be a big fan of RAW. But RAW is good if you've got all the time in the world to process. What we really need, certainly for the work I do, is quick turnaround. And that is what this camera enables you to do. You can shoot 4K, you can edit it as 4K, you can edit it as HD, and it is really simple. It records at 150 megabits a second, the 4K on the GY-HM200, and what that means is that we're shooting at basically the same data rate as ProRes standard. Now, ProRes has become entrenched as a workflow that most of us know. So when you're used to shooting 145 megabits a second for ProRes, turn that into 150 megabits a second for 4K on this camera, and you've got something very manageable to work with, and that's a big deal. Aside from that, there's something incredibly nice about having an all-in-one camera, everything in your hands, where basically you don't have to worry about changing the lens, you've got the built-in XLRs, you've got all the control, everything on the one little device in your hand. And I will say, while that might be regarded as a palm quarter, a handheld type camera, it's actually quite sizable for a palm quarter. If you want to strip it down, you can take the front off, you can take the handle off, and then you really want to look like a tourist. You look like a tourist, no one's going to know any different. And yet you're still shooting that wonderful 4K quality. Now, if I put that back on, you can see exactly what we're working with. So that's the camera stripped down, which to me is really nice. So portable, so inobtrusive, no one would think anything about it. And then obviously you can build it up, put the XLRs back on. You then have the full professional audio, and your camera that looks like a tourist camera, which still doesn't look outrageously large, suddenly has all the facilities you need. And I've shot with a lot of cameras, and it's just so difficult not having XLRs built in. So in short, what really impresses me majorly about this is it's like a big camera shrunk down. If you look at all the controls on it, what have we got? Everything's familiar. You've got your ND filters on the side. You have your focus assist, autofocus, manual focus, full auto. You got to move quick, hit that full auto button, hit record, you'll get what you need. If you want to go into full manual, switch it out of full auto. You've got your iris control, you've got your gain, you've got white balance, you've got shutter, auto exposure level. Having used this quite a lot over the last number of days, it's incredibly simple to use in full auto. Obviously, that's one button, but it's also really simple to use it in full manual. And what we want is cameras that are easy to use, that offer us a lot of capability, and basically let you get out and shoot and get good results. And that's what I feel about this little one, the GY-HM200. Some people have said to me in my reviews before, why don't you say something negative? You're always so positive. Well, the fact is, if I like a camera, I'm positive. And that's how I feel about this. I don't want to be negative, but if I want to be critical, okay, the screen, you got to be careful. It would be the weak point. That could break if you were to do something stupid. Not that it's flimsy, but I'm just saying you want to be careful with that. Camera's very plasticky, so if you drop it, it's probably going to break. But you know what? You drop a heavy camera with a metal shell, you might dent that as well. In fact, I've seen it happen before. But what happens is when you make a camera that's largely surrounded by plastic and not the metal housing, it gets incredibly light. And that to me is an advantage. So I'm not going to be critical. I'm just saying what I think. In your hands, this is a wonderful camera. Okay, there is one thing I could be slightly critical of, but it's not being critical, it's just stating the facts. The lens, f1.2 wide open. That's fantastic. By the time you zoom in all the way, you're down to f3.5, so your aperture drops as the lens zooms in further. That's understandable when they give you a lens that covers the sort of range this one does, which is actually, if I'm correct, about 29mm to 355mm in 35mm photography terms. That's quite a long amount of throw that you've got on that lens from wide to very long. And like I said, fast on the wide end and not so fast once you've zoomed in. I mean, f3.5 isn't exactly terribly slow. Some of the professional lenses I use on the big sensor cameras, they run in at f2.8 for the whole thing. That's what they are. So f3.5, you've lost a stop. But f1.2, that's good. Now the sensor in here, it's not a large sensor. I'm not 100% sure what the size of the sensor is. I've read the specs, but from what I've been told, it's a bit bigger than a 1/3-inch sensor. So you're not working with one of those large sensors, which means if you want that real shallow depth of field look, you're gonna have to work a little bit harder with this camera. But you can achieve it. Zoom in, step back, you'll get the results. You got your ND filters, put them in, open up the iris. You can achieve the out of focus depth of field thing if that's what you're chasing. The good thing about a smaller sensor is it keeps everything in focus as well. So when you're running around shooting really under pressure, you can actually more likely get your shots in focus than if it's a big sensor. What I'll say about this as well is it obviously does 4K, which is all I've been shooting this week, but it's also designed as an HD camera. So you've got 1920 1080 at 25 frames a second, 2997, 50 frames a second, 60 frames a second, take your pick. You want to do 1280, 720, you got all your choices there as well. So it's an HD camera, a camera that does 4K, small in your hands, and I'm not going to stand here and say too much more because who really cares? Let's look at the pictures are what count. I'll say one more thing. For those that are thinking, I need a big sensor, I need interchangeable lenses, JVC have the LS300, which is about to come out. It might even be out by the time you see this report. The LS300 uses the same codec, does the same 4K, but has a bigger sensor and gives you the ability to shoot 4K obviously, and to change your lenses and do all the HD formats. In terms of the codec that this camera shoots, it'll do H.264 for .mov, it'll do AVC HG as another format, and I can honestly say I haven't paid too much attention to all the codecs, because all I did was set it on the 4K .mov, which is what works for me on a Mac, and I've had nothing but success. Now I have to say one other thing. This is 4K made easy. It is so simple. You shoot on these little cards, little SDXC cards, 64 gigabytes. These cards cost me £40. Okay, you might want to get some other cards which are 128 gig, which will give you more, but £40, 53 minutes, I just bought 4 of them. So it's cheap on the media, it's easy to shoot, and when you take your 4K into Final Cut Pro 10, which is the edit system I use, it's so simple. I didn't have to transcode, I didn't need to do anything. The 150 megabits a second works great, and what can I say? This is 4K made easy.